everybody, Robbie Seay here. Welcome to the Worship Initiative podcast. This podcast exists to equip and encourage worship leaders and songwriters and artists and musicians and anybody who wants to tune in. We say welcome, and to you we say thanks for doing so today. Trenton Bell is our guest today. I love Trent. I love singing with Trent. I've gotten a chance to lead worship with him. You're going to love this conversation, and you've heard him on volume 22. He's going to be singing on some volumes for Worship Initiative coming up. He's an incredible singer and worship leader. So we're going to talk worship leadership, of course. But we are going to continue to have some conversations with Black brothers and sisters about their experience in 2020 as they are leading out in the church. And I want to hear from them. I want to know their heart. I want to learn from them. I want them to give us a word of encouragement and caution. And I want us to grow as we engage the conversations around race and justice. And so we're excited to have Trent with us today. Let's get to the conversation. And again, I want to say thank you to you for joining in. Okay, Trent. Hey, thanks for doing this, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks for the invite. It's good to be here. Thanks to you as well as the Worship Initiative just for this opportunity.
Yeah, it's been fun getting to know you, and leading worship with you recently was a blast. Man, I want to sing like you. So I'm doing my best to
I'm taking notes from you.
Man, so I'm a big fan and grateful to be able to lead worship with you and to call you a friend. As friends, when we've had dinner, we've gotten to lead worship, but we haven't talked about some of the things that I feel like maybe I want to cover today. So some of these things will be, there'll be some heavy, weighty conversations, and then some of it we'll talk about kids and family and whatever else. Okay. Man, I want to ask you though, 2020 has been a year, it's been a year, and it ain't over yet. And man, I want to hear your perspective as a Black man and as a worship leader and as a follower of Jesus, man, just what this year has been like for you and your family. What kind of roller coaster you've been on. I want to hear your experience, man, if you would.
Yeah, well, I think it's helpful for folks to have just a bit of context. I know they probably already did an intro piece, but just, I guess, what kind of house I grew up in will be helpful. Both of my parents are almost 70. And so just for a bit of cultural context, that means they grew up and were reared in the stormy 60s. So a lot of what I was raised in growing up was just a lot of caution, or just the conversation that you might have heard referred to of just like, hey, you are a Black man, don't forget that, because sometimes you might be reminded in ways that are painful or dangerous. And so I just like to start off with that so people kind of know where I'm coming from. And so 2020, oh gosh, it's, I ain't gonna lie, I was really angry. It just was overwhelming to just see the public display of fear, pain, aggression, and just living with the reality, like, I don't expect these things to happen. I'm sure those folks didn't either. But a just tangible possibility that even in 2020, this could still happen. There are certain things that people might look at me crazy and think, well, that's way in the past, but just my parents who are still alive, that's not a long time ago by any means. Then bring us to 2020. Some of the pains and I would say sins of humanity and our country, they definitely reared their ugly head. And, there's certain things that I just am mindful of, and I would say, I know now that I'm a believer first who happens to be African American, because if I lead with anything else, worship leader, musician, Black man, dad, like if I lead with that first, I'm going to set myself up to be disappointed or to be building my identity on something that isn't meant to handle it. And so, I'd be lying if I said that sometimes I don't tense up a little bit when I pass a cop, just make sure I'm going above and beyond to be above reproach. But I would say, thankfully I have a loving and supportive community, parents and close friends that I could kind of just process through some of that. And so I'd say a lot of the anger that was there is gone. Because for me, I can't speak for everybody, but it was based, in fear of like my worst fears being realized, of being helpless and not being able to defend myself or my family.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a spiritual answer that we know what to do with fear. Like, we haven't received a spirit of fear, but, you know, Romans 8 talks about how we've received a spirit of adoption by whom we cry, Abba, Father, a spirit of adoption as sons. And so just kind of processing everything that's going on through that lens. There is a conversation that I get to be a part of. I ain't gonna lie, it's old. It's an old conversation to me. I would say the topic of, you know, ethnic diversity, reconciliation isn't an old one. It was very sexy, if I could use that word, in this context. So now just at a place of, you know, how do I remain open and hopeful and expecting, like, really God to bring some healing amongst us in our country, and be open to the conversation and not dismiss it as been here, done that. I believe it when I see it type thing. And so I feel like that's a really quick cursory overview. And I would say today, you know, my family we're, at least for me, like my immediate family, my wife and I, we're hopeful. We're looking for ways to, you know, participate in reconciliation and healing and moving forward and having an honest conversation. But then we are also, you know, we've been super blessed throughout 2020, and like, it's not all been bad. I would say that.
Yeah. And tell me how this has affected you leading worship. I mean, you're an incredible worship leader and lead not only in your local church, but in other settings as well. Number one, how has that affected you in your worship leadership? And then number two, do you feel like the church has done a good job in allowing our people to worship? And by worship, you know, I mean respond to God on all fronts, both in joy and in sorrow. I'm curious just to get your take on that.
So the first question: how has this impacted worship leading? It's it's really kind of forced me to go deeper. You know, when you read and sing about the promises of God never leaving us or forsaking us, of Him being a good Father, of His presence. In His presence, there's been fullness of joy, pleasures forevermore at His right hand. It's really made me kind of lean into that. And like, am I going to choose to believe that and lead from that space, whether or not I feel it? So I would say that's the, you know, most noticeable impact. Yeah, from a worship leadership standpoint. And as far as the church's response, I would say it's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
I think it's made people really uncomfortable. And we generally, as humans, avoid that which causes us to stretch or be uncomfortable, or based out of fear for saying the wrong thing. But I think by choosing to give in to fear and be silent or just kind of skirt issues, you know, that's a little hurtful. I don't think that's the answer. And I would say, I think I've heard this is also me. I don't speak for all Black people everywhere, at all places, at all times, but just me. I don't find it to be helpful to say, when I hear people say they're colorblind.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, wait a minute. So you didn't try to coordinate your outfit today? You know? So you're
Hey,
blind.
all I got is a black T-shirt, man. So
Exactly.
yeah, ain't no coordination on my end. But yeah, I know what you mean.
Like, okay, that's real cheap.
Yeah.
You know, I think that, I personally think that's a bit of a cop out. And I think
Unpack that, because I mean, I don't say that, but I'm looking back. I'm thinking back at me as a 15, 16, 17-year-old, and relating to my friend Freddie, who we played basketball together. I may have said something stupid like that to him, in the attempt to try to say,
exactly,
hey man, like, I see you as an equal on all fronts, not realizing that the kingdom of God, what makes it so beautiful is the fact that your skin looks different than me, your experience is different than me, your family is different than me, and yet by the cross of Christ, we're brothers, right? So I may have been in that. I may have been the dude growing up saying something like that. So just unpack that for a second, because I think that's fairly common.
Yeah, I would just say, like, I think, to offer, charity, I think it's coming from a good place, right? Like you said, wanted to acknowledge and say, I'm not basing my value or your value based on your externals. But I think it kind of cheapens the fact if we like to know what the end's going to be. Well, Revelation 7:9, like all nations, tongues, and tribes are around the throne of God. Very full technicolor, passionate worship. And so I think being colorblind, choosing to be colorblind, kind of cheapens that reality that we get to experience now, but also what we're going to get to experience in eternity and in like its fullest sense, right? And so responses like that, where I don't see what you look like. I mean, that's kind of a lie, right? You probably drove, you probably like you use your eyes, and so like they aren't automatically off limits now when it comes to, ethnicity or variety. And I would say, like, I think broad brushstrokes, Robbie. Um, Man, I think we've allowed. It's okay to have a preference because I have a preference. I have a bias, right? I think we all have it. But I think what's been most unhelpful is I think the church, when it comes to celebrating, embracing, or leading towards ethnic variety, spaces where people can be seen, um, in some of the cultural nuances, I think we've allowed our comfort to kind of keep us back from pursuing, and really kind of like a scarcity mentality. And so from my framework, it will be music, right? And so you hear a gospel song that has sound theology, um, that is a little bit more complex than maybe some of the more modern rock stylings of music. And then I've heard some friends of mine say, well, we could never do that because I don't have XYZ. And I don't think the goal isn't to duplicate and copy exactly that. Instead, it could perhaps become, how can we do this? And that goes a long way, because to choose not to do it because, again, from a scarce mindset, I don't have the singers to do this. I don't have the players. I don't know how to play this. I mean, you're bringing so much attention on like you when it's not about you. And instead, like, well, what if, like, if this is truly God's heart, right? For the church, for like the universal church, this is where we're going and what we can experience now. I think the question should then become, how can we? And you may, if you develop that train of thought, you might come up to some obstacles or roadblocks, and that's okay. But I think at least you're trying and starting somewhere. Um, and so, and I would say what the church has done, I think more people in the church are seeing that there is a disparity, there is a gap, there are some things that need to be addressed. And I would also say it's an opportunity to kind of broaden our horizons of where the influence is coming from. So like, where are we gathering our theology? What do these people look like? What is their background? And that's not even just ethnicity. I think it even gets into like denominations, and like, are we only reading from a certain theologian? I think for the church leaders, I think it's an opportunity for us to kind of broaden our perspective, right? Where do we have influence? In our circles of life, am I always in a position of power or authority? Or where in my life is it an opportunity to kind of like come alongside and submit and receive another perspective, not from the motive of let me reach out and give money towards this cause or towards this, but hey, like, because I truly believe that we are the same, how can we start to invest and sow seeds in a relationship where there can now become a mutual giving and receiving, a mutual growth, a mutual learning? I think that's probably where the church has kind of fallen a little bit short. You know, yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious if you feel like some of the music that you listened to growing up, the influences that you've had as a musician to get where you are today. And again, I think you're such an incredible singer and love the way you lead. And do you feel like though you've had to neglect some of the music or influences that you grew up with in order to do what you do? And I guess it's speaking to this idea that, you know, maybe worship music is more homogenous than we want to admit right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if you think about that much.
Yes, I do. To answer your question, yes, there is a bit of, there's a difference between like laying down a preference and then just neglecting an expression altogether. And I would say in a lot of contexts that I've had the chance to serve in, love the people, super grateful for the experiences I've had there, because I think they've all contributed to like the view I have now. It's kind of like a soup. Every ingredient in the soup is, makes the soup what it is. I would say there's some ingredients in the soup that have been missing and that I haven't had the chance. Well, now it's important for me to find a way as a leader, but specifically in environments where I wasn't the guy or helping to spear and speaking to a culture. Yeah, there was a bit of like, it was a little thin musically when it comes to variety, and particularly things that have resonated with some of the styles that have influenced me growing up. And so, yeah, it's sad, honestly. It's like one of those just kind of like, it's disappointing. I think that word captures the sentiment. It's a little disappointing. Now that doesn't hold me back personally, but I could see how it could other folks where that's where they are in their walk.
Yeah, let's stay just on music for a minute. I've got a few other things that may be a little weightier, but I'm curious. You're a songwriter, and do you have rhythms of songwriting? It's one of the things I want this podcast to focus on a little bit more in the coming weeks. We're gonna try to get Shane B to sit down and teach us all how to write great songs, right? I mean, I'm gonna take some notes on that one.
Help us.
Yeah, help us out. But I'm curious, do you have some rhythms? How do you approach songwriting? And do you write specifically for your congregation and then you take that hat off and then you're writing kind of for yourself and you more personal, or does it all kind of just get thrown in there? I know that's probably 5 questions in there, but take a step.
I'm picking up what you're putting down. Yes. Songwriting, there's an element of writing for like knowing what your audience is and what the goal is. I'd like to think that I try to restrict myself less of like, I'm sitting down and I need to produce a song for this. For me, it begins with like the words, the subject of the music, and really what do I want people to feel. I personally believe that music is a gift. It's beautiful, it's universal, and it's very powerful. And so it's kind of like, it may be generally like phrases. I'll hear phrases or I'll get a phrase and not necessarily a melody, and I'll just kind of store it away, or vice versa. I'll hear a melody, I don't really have any words to it, and I'll store it away. And then depending on who I'm writing with, what the purpose is, what the goal is, either I kind of go back into that catalog or we'll like craft something fresh together. And so I don't really have like a formula. I think it's more about a connection with the person that I'm in that space with, because it's very intimate. Mm-hmm. It's very, it can be fragile in the sense of like, it's something that's pulled out of you, and I would say through the spirit. It's drawn out through the spirit. It's spirit inspired, and so you just kind of make yourself available, and then you feed off of each other. And so, yeah, or I'll hear a concept, or a scripture, or whatever the case might be, and it starts to ring in my head. I'm like, oh, there's something here. I feel like there's something I would like to say about this. And I would say when it comes to stylings, like I've been influenced by so much hymns. I'm kind of embarrassed to tell you this, but my dad used to listen to Bruce Hornsby, which is very not typical. It's very atypical for an African-American male.
Come on.
So I have like this isn't just like
Yeah.
I feel like that I'm a bit of a musical mutt.
Yeah.
However, what comes through in my sound based like just from a style, and I think that's just how God has wired it, is like R&B and like soul and gospel. Those things they just come alive. Like that's what I heard a lot of growing up. Um,
Did you guys sing around the house? I mean, I love the way that you pick out harmonies.
uh-huh.
What I've noticed about some of the tracks you've sung on at Worship Initiative, just like the harmonies are really unique. So were y'all singing at home? I mean, was your
Yeah,
family?
musical family. We were growing up. My parents are like, so I have two older brothers, and like at any given moment, we always had to be ready to present ourselves well, to do whatever we did confidently. We could not be disqualified for age or being too shy, because then we would get a very stern talking to, if we like, you know, that wasn't allowed. So musical family, and I can't reflect on this without giving credit to my choir directress.
Mm,
Her name is Dahl Lissenby from Michigan, and
that's
she
awesome.
taught us at a super young age how to hear harmonies. So it didn't matter if we were singing alto, you better know the soprano and the tenor part and be able to produce it. And so that was really what kind of started to like instill in me, like doing what you do for the Lord with like joy, excitement, but excellence. And if you didn't have it, you work on it until you figured it out. And
Yeah.
so that kind of carried through to my family dynamic. And the church is where I got my start, church choir. That's where I got my first training and like helping to develop my ear. And then of course things, got supplemented along the way through school band and other opportunities to get to grow.
I love it. Shout out to the music teachers. That's what we're doing
Yes.
right now.
Yes.
Kyle Fontenot, I hope you're listening. So you mentioned Michigan, but now you live in Texas. So did that, I mean, Texans we're just annoying. You know what I mean? We just think this is the greatest place ever. But I love me some friends up in Michigan. So did it take you a while I mean, did you adjust to living in the South? I mean, how old were you when you moved down here? What was that like?
So I was 12. I come from a military family, so I've kind of already been exposed to variety, to ethnic diversity specifically. Um, it was an adjustment just for the sheer. I don't like being hot, Robbie. What? Ooh, and I made not the mistake, but then I fooled around and got a marching band.
You
So,
got polyester. Got that polyester on, didn't you?
ooh, I tell you, ain't nothing that'll bake you like a Texas summer sun, man. And so the adjustment, it was different, right? Like it was very rural. And just the way of life, I grew up on soul food, so the food wasn't as much of a shift for me. Um, just kind of like the pace. But then also, I would probably understand Michigan differently now than I did growing up.
Sure.
So there was an adjustment, but it was more so from the standpoint of all my childhood friends, I'm leaving and got to start over, and ever since. So that was a little hard, but we figured it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
So
I want to ask you, I want to jump back before we close. I want to just ask you, because you said something earlier that piqued my interest. You just said in some ways, it can be tiring to have so many conversations about diversity or, ethnicity and race. And I mean, and I would imagine at the same time, I want to hear from you, because I think there are a lot of white people like me who feel like they don't want to end up on the extremes of these conversations. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes because of that, um, maybe can be silent and don't know how to actually engage in a way that's fruitful, and especially in a way that's gospel's rooted and centered. So I'm just curious, because I would imagine there are certain conversations that are just going to wear you down. But what types of conversations with your white friends and white brothers and sisters do you go, man, we actually need to have more of those types of dialogues?
um, I would say where there's like a willingness to acknowledge that we aren't crazy, you know, we as collectively Black people, and that not just that we aren't crazy, but that there's a desire to create a space where it's not just tokenism or like, well, anytime we're doing a gospel song, let's call up the, or anytime we want to do a song with flavor, let's call up the XYZ. Because to me, the more long-term win is for you to have this perspective and to share about it boldly in the spaces where I'm not, because it's easy to think about it while I'm there. But I think where the growth or where the ripple of opportunity is, in those board meeting rooms and, those places where I think the influence hits differently when it comes from somebody that looks like you and not just me. So there is a role that I get to play in steering that conversation. So I think that, always done in relationship too. So that's generally most helpful when it's in the context of a relationship. And I would say, where it's not as pressurized to like fix you, like universal you. So when somebody's like, tell me everything, no, like, let's pause, and like, yourself better than I do. I can give you some suggestions or some places to start, but I would say maybe it's an opportunity to do a little research, read something, pick up another book besides Tim Keller. Love him. I read his marriage book. Pick up another book besides John MacArthur. Whoever you tend to gravitate towards, take a little bit of personal responsibility, expand the area where you look from, where you read from, where you influence. And then now let's have a conversation where I get to hear you interact with, like, okay, so how was that experience for you? What did you learn? What challenged you? And so it's kind of a mutual, like, working together, and not me like feeding you everything. Because again, I'm not the authority. And I would say, I think some Black people will probably, unfortunately call me white, which is, I'm like, okay, that's not accurate. So even my perspective as a believer who happens to be African American is going to be different, just because I grew up in a very privileged home when it comes, financially, and had both parents in the home. So from a statistical perspective, like, I'm already in a different place, and still very much so in tune and connected with, as best I know how to be. But it's going to be different than I think from what most people might be a little fearful of. And I think I present generally more friendly, I hope anyway. So is that answering the question?
Absolutely is. I talked to my buddy Jimmy McNeil yesterday, and one of the things that we talked about was Crawford Loritz is a pastor in Georgia, and he says that just understanding one another and ethnic diversity is only half of the battle. That unity is what the Christian is actually called to. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
I think I hear what he's getting at. As long as I think the church has found great theology, buzzwords like unity and reconciliation and things to unify, I would be curious to see what is the practical living out of that, right? Because I think we need to have our theology correct. And we also get to apply that into our lives and how we live. But I agree, unity is key, reconciliation is key. I believe this is, primarily a sin problem. Now, sure, there's consequences that play itself out, in our world, aka 2020, that I think we get to enter that conversation biblically in a responsible way, but then also with compassion and awareness of, like, okay, this is my perspective, but there are other perspectives that are needed that may have a nuance or something that will be helpful in our responding well, and letting the change and the reflection start with us. So.
Yeah, that's good. And before we go, I want to ask you just two quick things. regarding the capital C church, I mean, what's one thing that just you're encouraged by? I mean, whether it's as a worship leader or songwriter, or just as a man, as you're taking a look at the church broader than just your local church, what are you most encouraged by? And then what's an area of concern that you go, man, I want to just speak to that before we go.
I'm encouraged by like the songs that are being penned, and I'm encouraged by, you know, some of the variety that you're beginning to see that's starting to become, I would say, more prevalent in stylings. I'm encouraged by just, you know, there are some genuinely like loving, Jesus loving, kind people in the church that are supportive. And so I'm grateful that the larger C church, I think, it's embracing as best they know how and being loving, and then starting to have some conversations or being open to conversations that I think wouldn't have necessarily been as prevalent. And then an area to speak into is just like, you know, how are we leading our churches? Anybody in a place of authority and influence, I think there's a responsibility there. Like how are we encouraging our people and shepherding them through our example, and not just what we say about scripture, but how are we leading them into these spaces where they live and where they work? How are we using the word to equip people to do this well, to do it by faith? And yeah, just kind of speaking into that, like when it comes down to practicality, like who is leading our churches? Sure. You kind of mentioned a concept earlier, you know, homogeny or being homogenous. Starting to ask some questions where we see it and it's no embedded value, just to, you know, start to be honest as if we've been lying, but evaluate it and not bring any type of embedded value to the table of this is wrong or this is right. Let's start to truly evaluate, and how can we do this better?
Yep. We're always encouraging leaders to spend time in the Word, of course, but also the Psalms. I mean, especially worship leaders to know the Psalms. There were many years I was leading worship, but the Psalms, you know, I was familiar with the ones that most people were familiar with, and I didn't have a better understanding and appreciation of the Psalms. And so, as we close, just would you? I think you've selected a psalm. Would you just read a psalm over us, kind of as a benediction of sorts, and then we'll be done.
Yes, it's 21 verses. Is that cool?
You bring it on.
Okay, Psalm 145 is coming from the ESV. I will extol you, my God and King, and bless your name forever and ever. Every day I will bless you and praise your name forever and ever. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. One generation shall commend your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts. On the glorious splendor of your majesty and on your wondrous works I will meditate. They shall speak of the might of your awesome deeds, and I will declare your greatness. They shall pour forth the fame of your abundant goodness and shall sing aloud of your righteousness. The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. The Lord is good to all, and his mercy is over all that he has made. All your works shall give thanks to you, O Lord, and all your saints shall bless you. They shall speak of the glory of your kingdom and tell of your power, to make known to the children of men your mighty deeds and the glorious splendor of your kingdom. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures throughout all generations. The Lord is faithful in all his words and kind in all his works. The Lord upholds all who are falling and raises up all who are bowed down. The eyes of all look to you, and you give them their food in due season. You open your hand, you satisfy the desire of every living thing. The Lord is righteous in all his ways and kind in all his works. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. He fulfills the desire of those who fear him. He also hears their cry and saves them. The Lord preserves all who love him, but all the wicked he will destroy. My mouth will speak the praise of the Lord, and let all flesh bless his holy name forever and ever.
This is God's Word. Trent Bell, much love and respect to you, man. Thank you for doing this.
Same to you, man. Thank you for the time. I appreciate just your heart and these questions. And, I'm enjoying the relationship we're getting a chance to build, seriously.
Much love to you, brother. Thank you again.
Bless you, man.